Imagine inheriting a business partner with a GDP per capita roughly 30 times smaller than your own. That is the economic gap sitting at the center of the Korean Peninsula today. South Korea's GDP per capita stands at roughly $33,000. North Korea's is estimated at somewhere between $600 and $1,200, depending on the source and the year. The gap is not just large, it is almost without modern precedent. German reunification in 1990 is the closest comparison the world has, and even that gap was only about 3-to-1 at the time of unification. Korea's gap is 10 times wider, so the question economists, policymakers, and ordinary citizens keep returning to is simple but staggering. What would it actually cost to close it? The estimates vary enormously depending on the model, but they all share one quality: they are very large. The RAND Corporation has estimated reunification costs in the range of $2 trillion over roughly 30 years. A study from the Korea Development Institute placed the figure closer to $2.1 trillion over the same period. The German government spent roughly 1.7 trillion euros on Eastern Germany over 30 years after 1990, and Germany started from a far more favorable position. North Korea's population is approximately 26 million people, roughly half of South Korea's 52 million. Its infrastructure, roads, railways, power grids, water systems, is described by the Korea Transport Institute and other researchers as decades behind the South. Life expectancy in the North is about 72 years compared to 83 in the South, according to World Health Organization data. And perhaps most telling, the United Nations World Food Program has documented chronic food insecurity affecting a significant share of the North Korean population in recent years. Each of those gaps represents not just a humanitarian challenge but a budget line item. The gap did not appear overnight. It accumulated over 70 years of radically different economic choices made on either side of the same peninsula. In the 1950s, the two Koreas had roughly comparable GDP per capita. The South began liberalizing and industrializing aggressively through the 1960s and 70s under export-led growth policies. The North chose a philosophy of self-reliance called Hushae, which prioritized heavy industry and military capacity while closing the economy to outside trade and investment. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, North Korea lost its primary trade partner and aid donor almost overnight. The resulting economic shock in the 1990s led to what North Korean defectors and international researchers have called the arduous march, a famine that, according to estimates cited by the Bank of Korea and various academic studies, may have killed hundreds of thousands of people. Infrastructure investment stagnated, human capital development stalled. Decades of sanctions imposed over the nuclear weapons program further compressed the economy. By the time reunification became a serious policy conversation, the gap had widened far beyond anything German policymakers faced in 1990. The financial burden would fall primarily on South Korea, and researchers have been frank about what that means. Studies from the Korea Institute for International Economic Policy suggest that in certain rapid reunification scenarios, South Korea's annual reunification bill could equal 5 to 12% of its GDP per year for a decade or more. That would crowd out government spending on education, welfare, and infrastructure in the South. South Korean bond markets could face significant pressure, and the Korean won could weaken substantially. There is also what economists call the social cost. The integration of 26 million people with different education systems, work norms, and institutional expectations is not just a budget problem. In Germany, social tensions between Osses and Wesses, Eastern and Western Germans, persisted for decades. Korea's gap is far deeper. Defector studies conducted by the Database Center for North Korean Human Rights and Academic Institutions suggest significant gaps in basic economic literacy and institutional trust. Beyond finance, there is the question of security. Demobilizing one of the world's largest standing armies, securing a nuclear weapons stockpile, and managing the geopolitical concerns of China, the United States, and Russia, none of which has a simple price tag. Korea's reunification math is extreme, but the pattern it illustrates is not unique. Across the world, divided societies, whether separated by ideology, war, or policy, accumulate compounding divergence with every passing decade. The longer the division, the higher the eventual bill. Germany managed reunification at enormous cost, even with a 3-to-1 income gap. Korea faces a gap 10 times wider after a division now entering its 8th decade. The universal lesson is about the compounding cost of delay, not just in money but in human capital, institutional trust, and shared memory. Every year of separation adds another layer to what economists and historians would need to undo. Whether Korean reunification happens in 5 years or 50, the economic math does not wait. It grows quietly, steadily, on both sides of the DMZ. And whatever form the eventual reckoning takes, the arithmetic will demand to be settled.